So here we have a guest today. He is the main person from Brule. Brule is, of course, everyone knows who they are, but they're a great band, and this is Paul. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah. I look forward to it. I enjoyed our first meeting down at the Levitt show.
Yep.
And it's kind of interesting to hear about all that you've got going on.
Yeah. You know, I love music, and world music is one of my favorites, and so. From the first time I saw your band, I was like, oh my God, that is an amazing band. And I believe, I don't know if there's any other bands around the world like yours.
Well, I think we share a common thread, first of all, culturally. Mm-hmm. And I think music is that bridge between our cultures. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to a group like Brule, I don't think there are too many other groups like us. We started doing this 25 years ago.
Wow.
And at that time, there was a handful of us, like 4 or 5 groups that were kind of what I call is pioneering one of the last musical frontiers. It's the emergence of our culture, Native America, trying to emerge out into the mainstream to find a place. And that's important for us to do because we need something for the young kids where they can express themselves musically and still keep part of the culture. I've really strived on that. But what's happened in the 25 years, sadly, is that a lot of the young groups that have come up have just morphed into one of the other existing categories. Like they've become rappers or they've become country artists, and they haven't brought any part of the culture with them. And so you kind of just get absorbed by the rest of the industry without any kind of identity. So today, Brule is probably one of maybe 2, 3 groups. And I'm being generous. So there's not too many of us out there.
Yeah. Well, so I have a question. I do want to know how you started this and how it came to be. But I first want to ask you a question that's been sort of in my mind since I met you. I know that a lot of the musicians are your family, and some are your kids,
right?
And so when I have daughters and I have sons, and when my daughters were little, I never wanted to push music on them, and I said, no, I'm not gonna force them to do music. And then they grew up and they didn't do any music, and then they said to me, why didn't you teach us how to play music? And so now I remarried. I have another set of boys. I have 2 boys. They're little, and now I'm trying to sort of push the music on them. Did you push the music on your kids, or did they naturally just evolve into it?
Well, they evolved into it naturally, and it was a natural process driven by a life-changing experience in our case. And I don't think there's time for the whole story, but just in a nutshell, Alex, I was one of the native kids adopted off the reservation at birth. I was raised by adoptive parents. I was never told I was Native American because in America here, back in earlier times, it was still taboo to openly share that information. So life goes on. I never knew anything about my Native American heritage. I lost both of my parents at the age of 38. So when I was 38, my wife began to look through their things, and she found some adoption papers that had been hidden. Anyway, this all leads back. She finds my family on this little reservation in central South Dakota.
Wow.
And that was Thanksgiving Day of 1993. So our kids by this time were already in junior high and high school. So they're old enough to be aware of what's going on.
Right.
And as a young kid, I was a rock and roller. I grew up in America, kid. And so in the 60s that was kind of my early training ground. So I was emulating a lot of the British rock bands, the heavy rockers mostly.
I love the Rolling Stones and Metallica, believe it or not.
And AC/DC, all that stuff. Well, so we were then, through a small miracle, we were reunited with my biological family, and that reunion, our children were all present when that was going on. So all this spirit and emotions and all this is running very high. It's changing your life, and in that weekend, boom, we had to kind of reevaluate everything about life. So the kids went through, my daughter and son, went through the same life-changing process. And so when we began to take that experience and try to tell that story musically, they wanted to be involved. So it was a natural process with, it was a natural process with a lot of inspiration behind it.
Wow.
So we started off in 1994 and never looked back.
Wow.
And
so you were already a musician then when you sort of switched over to.
Yeah, I was a musician, but a totally different kind. I had a lack of inspiration, to be honest with you, and music was all about, it was more ego driven because that's just how we were in our younger days. After the reunion, it became all passion and spirit and inspiration began to fall from the sky.
Right.
And now it was just an attempt to share the culture. Once I realized that nobody was doing that, it became almost an urgency to get out and to present our culture musically. And in a way, we were kind of the perfect candidate because we had this early training that a lot of the individuals in our culture didn't have, just because we're still an impoverished culture. And the reservations, the opportunities don't present themselves like they would here in a city like Sioux Falls or Rapid City or the little town where I grew up in Minnesota. So I was fortunate as a young kid to have that training. And so just to take that and to incorporate the culture, and it was not a really difficult process, but because it requires a lot of respect and care, it's taken us time. It's taken us all this time. Yeah.
Well, okay, we have to go to a message from our sponsors, but when we come back, I definitely wanna know. I mean, how difficult it was for you to sort of start the group, the band. What do you call it? A group, a band? You're kind of like a organization there. I mean, it's just amazing what you guys do. But let's go to this message and then we'll be back.
Good.